The area of about the whole question of siting,
yes,
for housing, and particularly affordable housing, where the majority of the Kenyans can live, has several factors to think about: the location and the land. One of them is the issue of price, because the locations that are very close to development are expensive, and that of course builds up the cost of our projects. When you go further away from the centers of development, the land is a bit cheaper. But now there's a problem here. The problem is that the people who are buying homes are in active economic life. They are working, others are doing their micro and small enterprises. They need to be able to access their stations of work quickly. So when you get cheap land, it is likely to be far away, but it is where affordability is better. And you pose a new question, is that why should I have my house so far away where I have to pay so much money to access my workplace? So you will find that there's going to be a challenge, and it is already developing, where the developers of affordable housing will go much further, but the target market do not find that convenient because public transport is not available, it is too far away, and the conveniences of accessing your workplace, schools, is difficult. So that is going to be a continuing challenge about location and siting. Now the other one is the issue of infrastructure, availability of sewer. You know, when you go to the affordable housing programs that we have now, and we want to commend the government because this time round we have got a committed effort towards affordable housing, more than ever before. You know, engaging all the stakeholders. We are very happy to see the amount of effort, time spent to make this work. But now the infrastructure to support this, for affordable housing to happen, then we have to have high density. It's not possible to have low density and still be able to afford the kind of prices we are talking about. So high density demands also very good infrastructure. And that is a challenge that we have. You know, good roads to service all these people, enough sewerage, enough water, and all that. So we need other things to happen to support affordable housing around the location and that site. Proper infrastructure development. Otherwise, you have, like what Ibrahim said earlier, you will have a development that is not well supported, and you create some new urban problems around it. So these are some of the issues to consider. Lastly is, of course, accessibility to social services. You know, schools are very important because you want the families of these homeowners to be able to quickly get to schools for the children, and also hospitals and other social amenities. So these are the considerations that we take into account in terms of location and siting for a successful housing project.
So, but how can the government also address maybe the issue of pricing for the land through zoning? Because I think the benefits of zoning is to allow, you know, the government to control demands of land, demand and price of land within a particular area. So we can
Maybe
actually...
I could comment on that.
Yes, please.
You see, when we talk about affordable housing, remember this is a concept for the whole country. It's not about Nairobi or towns only. It's a devolved idea, and we would like to see the affordable housing program successful in every county. And therefore, each county has to be able to show how their efforts in their own planning is supporting the affordable housing program. Today, as we are speaking, most of the counties have not completed their county spatial development plans. The spatial planning that is able to zone, what you have described about zoning, and be able to say where is agriculture, where is going to be manufacturing, where is going to be housing, is not been completed in most of the counties. And therefore, when developers of housing, and within the counties, because we would like to see the affordable housing program successful in the counties, because we are now a devolved nation, and we like equal development across the country, is that we would like to see a fast-tracked policy around all the counties in terms of their zoning, land use plans to be ready and gazetted, which has not happened. And therefore now, every time we are talking about agriculture against housing, it becomes a debatable point. The planners in the counties sit and consider this on a case-by-case basis. And that should not be the case. It should be well zoned. And therefore the county, once the zoning happens and the county spatial plans are adopted properly, then they would service the zones according to the user. Industrial puts what is required for the industry. Housing, you know what is supposed to happen. And therefore there's a lot of work required around other people, beyond the developers, to make this work. This is obviously progressive, but there's an urgency now to put our house in order in the counties and everywhere, so that the affordable housing program could be successful.
But I thought that was another remit of the county public works as well, on the zoning beat. I wonder why has it not
No,
been...
there's no, as far as we are concerned right now, and we have been monitoring, there's no, you know, the process of planning,
Yes.
A county land use, is that you have to have a proper scheme done, stakeholder consultations done, master planning done, land use agreed, and then eventually the plans are drawn and they show the zoning for all the land use, agriculture, manufacturing, housing, properly done, and then it goes to the county assembly, adopted, and then gazetted, and then it becomes now a policy. That has not happened in the county. So what is happening now is that the county land use, generally, most of the counties, is undefined, and you have to keep negotiating as a developer about where you want to site your project, and that causes a meeting, and they think, is it appropriate or not? And we need to remove those kind of uncertainties and a speculative nature of planning. So planning our nation is very important, because the projects we are talking about here are long term. This housing agenda is not an agenda for a year or two.
Yes.
It's going to continue for many years. The housing demand will grow. And therefore, the earlier we are able to put our housing plans around national planning, around our land use, around all the counties, and have these matters very definite, it's going to help all of us. Because even the investors we are talking about now, they have a long-term view around their participation on housing in Kenya.
Right, just a moment, Samuel. We hear from Edwin. Because also I thought we had the physical planning bill. Is it an act right now? I left it at a bill, and I think still it is collecting dust if it's not been enacted as it is right now. Was it not really capturing all this that we're talking about, even addressing the issue of the counties as well? Because I know, after all, even Saiton will need now to get, you know, the up markets within the county, the up end, of course, housing within the counties as well. This can be a tripping wire for you.
Yeah. Whether act or bill or planning, I mean, we have very great plans. I remember meeting somebody recently who said, you know, when Vision 2030 was launched, I remember being in, the person was in class 3, and it seemed like a really grand vision of Kenya. And then she said, and by the way, now that 2030 is about to get here, I can't see us getting to what I saw when it was being launched. So I will not pay too much attention.
Even you're not given any intermediate reports. Yeah. At least when you tell us this is the so far, this is where we wanted to be within the 15 years, like the MDGs that we had, at least within 15 there were interventions. And the Vision 2030, maybe it will be an epiphany. One day we'll wake up and in that dreamland, things have changed, the landscape is different in Vision 2030.
Yeah, so I would not pay too much attention to what we say or write. I would pay attention to what we do. Because even the affordable housing, it will happen, both private sector and the government, but I don't think we are going to get to 500,000 units by 2022. So we have to do as much as we can. But going back to
that is a pie in the sky as far as we're too ambitious.
I'm not going to go that far, but what is important is that we look at what do people want and what are we doing to get them to that housing. If you ask somebody, whether in the county or in Nairobi, especially in the affordable segment, what do you want? The number one thing is accessibility. How do I get from the matatu to my house, or from my house to the matatu, to school, to the things that I need? The second thing they want is security. And then the third is utilities, water, sewer, electricity. So as a developer, you can't sit and just say, I will wait for government to deliver these things. you have to ask yourself and say, okay, it's not like government is not doing anything. They are doing quite a lot in terms of infrastructure. But is it all coming together in terms of a coherent plan? Probably not. But then you have to look at where are the highways, where is the SGR, where are the sewer projects, and then you plan yourself around it, and then the clients will come. So I would not wait too much for the bills and the acts, which are important. They will have an impact, but as we wait for these things to come together, what can we do as private sector? And that's what we do at Cyton, and say, where are the bypasses going to come when we look at the plans? Where are the roads going to come? And if accessibility is what's important, how can we then plan ahead to identify pieces of land that are coherent with what we already see on the ground, even as we engage the government, even as we engage State Department of Housing and say the plans need to be coherent. We have to work on the land issues. We have to work on the physical planning. There are so many issues that need to be sorted out for housing prices to be affordable. But until that happens, and I don't know if it will happen in our lifetime, you have to do something as private sector to try and help with this solution, even as you make money as a developer.
All right.
There's also an issue of goodwill on the part of the government and the players in the industry. And as much as my friend want to be candid about this, we had a benchmarking tour to Rwanda last year with the Institute of Surveyors of Kenya. And one thing we learned is that in Rwanda, the geospatial planning is very nice, top-notch. And within 8 hours, you get all your documents and everything that you need. The land value is known, the zoning, and everything is known, well cut out. And we were very curious to know how this happened, only to realize that the architect and the people behind it is one Shemo Churu from Kenya. And it is working in Rwanda. If you want a land transfer, they know the value, they know the location, they know the utility. It's well clarified in a small country. Then we wanted to probe further. Why isn't it happening in our country? Then we realized that these people, when they came to the counties, they were not willing to take that direction because people don't like efficiency. People don't like things that are moving very well, because here land value is based on notion and perceptions. And actually, sometimes there are no clear parameters. It depends on whether you want to borrow or whether you want to lend. That is a discussion. But there should be parameters that if it is land in Kiambu, this is the highest you can go. In this zone, in this part of Kiambu, it is different. And it should be known so that even when the government is planning for taxation regime, they know in this zone you can do this, the school will be here. So when we put the cart before the horse, what is happening is that we are rushing to discuss about affordable houses, but we've not addressed the issue of spatial planning.
Spatial planning itself, yes.
Yeah, itself. So what it means is that the government is asking us, where do you want to build so that we can give you this support, infrastructure and all that. But it should be the other way around. How I wish that the government will come with social amenities like school and other anchor projects that will attract people to that place. Instead of telling us to do things, then we start figuring out, we have 10,000 houses here. Where do we do a school? Then there's no space. There's no one willing to sell the space for that. So it should be the other way around. For example, when you want to do a mall, you look for anchor tenants. The supermarket, whether it's Carrefour or whatever supermarket, it becomes the anchor. And the minute that anchor, tenant is there, it becomes very easy for other secondary tenants to come. Because people will go to a mall because of Naivas, Carrefour, and other whatever, and then Javas and what have you. The same case with development. Take university to Kitengela, one of the major universities, support all a hospital, a national hospital, or major schools. People will gravitate around that place, and then the cost of, the aspect that my brother has raised there of people wanting to go near where they work, you devolve that kind of settlement from the core areas. So I think that narrative needs to be addressed very seriously, because if we are serious about have 500,000 units in the next 2-3 years, we cannot just do it haphazardly, because the issue of security, the issue of sewerage, sanitation, diseases, and so many other things will come into place. Fire, for example, how do you zone off such places, high density, against certain things? And for example, even as we exploit vertical expansion, the minute you go above the 5th floor, it no longer becomes tenable. Someone will tell you that, the QS will tell you that from the 5th floor, the cost escalates because of maintenance. You need a lift, you need water to pump there. So maintaining that, you can find that you are renting a house at 15,000, but the maintenance, the service charge is 10,000 or 7,000. So it doesn't become tenable anymore. So there must be so many other things that we must look into. Shall we have water? Most of the people living above ground, the fourth, fifth ground floor, they don't get access to water because of the availability and the logistics. So what is my point? The government must show concerted effort by doing their part. The first thing is planning. The other thing is providing social amenities that will attract people into certain zones. And those anchor tenants becomes like a magnet to settlements around there. That is an issue that must be addressed so that we don't again find ourselves 5-10 years from now having those other challenges.
Right, let's just get back to the bit of zoning and the pricing as well. And Madhana, you can help us here, because it seems also just left land to the market forces. Is there a way that we can get intervention from the government that even with the zoning, we know this is a price limit for this, market, this zoning of lands that we have in this? Because if we leave it to the market forces right now, I think, or the speculative bits, this will not be affordable in the long run. What do you think?
Thank you. But before I come to that, Dibal, allow me to, because listening to Lee, it's almost obvious that there's a very big opportunity that's currently available for the county governments, which are outside, managing space outside Nairobi City, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, and Eldoret.
Yes.
Because they haven't got to their burst limit. I think they still have a very nice opportunity to zone and plan the land within their jurisdiction. But sometimes when you withdraw from, when you are engaged in a thing, you get very overwhelmed. But when you withdraw and look at the actions that have happened since we got devolved, you get the impression that they haven't quite appreciated the opportunity that is within their hands. So the governors and the professionals managing devolved units need to realize that this is their best time to prepare the spatial plans that Samuel is also talking about, and ensure that they begin to respect land use as best they can. In a number of budding urban centers, you get the impression that they also haven't appreciated that land is always cheaper today than tomorrow. So the resources that are coming to their hands could very easily be, some of it could be channeled to the purchase of land for purposes of for purposes like housing, so that then you stop it now, not tomorrow. Then when investors come into those towns, it will be a lot easier to begin to point them to an existing pool of land. Now, I think if you engage them, probably they haven't thought about it, but I think it's good for us through a program like this to raise their attention to that opportunity today, so that they think about how best to set resources, both financial and technical, to sort out, to stop the situation now. If we were dealing with Nairobi in its 50s, we would be talking about a very different situation in terms of this discussion we're holding. So they have their situation of the 50s today. If they can handle it before, kind of the population dynamics are also reversing, the migration into the bigger cities. But it will be so fast for some of those towns. If they don't do it now, they will probably be struggling with a problem harder than Nairobi, because also the resource challenge faces them. But then coming to what you mentioned about the issue of
But
land.
before we even go to the issue of land, I think you, because that particular spatial planning that we're talking about, that we're still grappling with the issues of 50s or in the 50s, is it because we still have the same master plan of the 50s, or it has been developed, or what is happening? Because it seems we've never had any launch of any master plan going forward as far as spatial planning is concerned, because things have changed so far. I mean, there's a population burst in the city as well. But let him finish on land, then we come to you, Lee, and Edwin.
On the national spatial plan.
On the national spatial planning.
I
Yeah, okay,
can
fantastic.
mention-
We'll pick
yeah.
up on it. Modane, just complete with the land as well.
Yes, so I was just saying that the experts in our sector, the land sector, will just have to appreciate that this country must be given a solution in regard to the value of land. We cannot have a scenario whereby cost of land is probably in a number of scenarios higher than that in New York or even London.
It's very prohibitive. Yeah.
Yes, it is certainly prohibitive. But it will call upon policy interventions, and I mentioned some of them when I was beginning to talk.
Yes.
I mentioned
The value index,
yes, value index as one. I also talked about the capital gains
tax.
which is coming into it. The Sectional Properties Act, which is now under discussion. And it just requires constant attention so that we don't, for a long time, we just assumed, the market it's good to have a free market. But when it comes to land, there are policy interventions that could be done to begin to make people appreciate that, look, it's practical. You are not going to have an escalation that phases out everyone other than a small bracket. That's not easy, but I think for the country, a bit of what has happened is good. What we need to be seeing is the application of these tools that have come into the market lately, and a very good watch so that if the tool is hurting, again, the same market that you want to help, then you go back and retouch it.
Right. On the master plan and the spatial planning, Lee?
Yes, we had, for a long time in Kenya, we did not have a national spatial plan and land use plan for many, many years. And about 2 years ago, the government, through the Ministry of Lands, was able to conclude a process through a stakeholder workshop that we were also involved in the private sector,
Okay.
Where the final document of the national spatial plan was concluded and it was launched at KICC. So we now have a national spatial plan for the nation as Kenya,
Okay.
which was a very big milestone. Now, the next step that happened after that, and it was announced during the launch, was that it would now move to the counties, because that was national, and now that we have evolved a government system, the counties were to continue with that work and prepare the county master plans, spatial master plans.
Okay.
Now, what has happened is that there has been a disconnect between the very good efforts of the national government and concluding that effort at the county level. So what may be required to happen now is to put a timeline and a deadline around this effort, because it was a national effort with a program, but we are stuck at the counties. And that is what possibly there needs to be a law that touches, brings the funding, the county funding, apart from the CIDPs, to also have valid and adopted county spatial plans as a condition. Because if we do not have proper county spatial plans happening, we are going to have very uncontrolled developments happening in the counties. The counties are still in a good place right now because they are low density. But over time, the challenges that we are facing in Nairobi that have taken, some of them you cannot correct, would happen now in the counties. These problems in the city and in the towns would get devolved to the counties. So there is an urgency when we have time to plan well, and that should be a condition to funding. Otherwise, you're going to end up with unplanned counties and planned settlements and counties where land use is no longer defined, and you cannot plan anymore, because when people come up with the developments and do all sorts of things to reverse is very difficult.
It's very difficult.
Yes, to reverse.
And of course, Edwin, okay, you can continue.
Just wanted to add one quick thing to the question you asked Mwadhane around land,
Yes.
whether government should regulate or determine pricing. Certainly agree with what he's saying, policy and regulation to moderate, but certainly we should leave it to market forces.
market forces.
Because government should only do that which I can't do for myself, roads, security. If you then bring government to things that private sector should do, and I'm reading your own paper here, Uwezo Fund, Women Fund, Youth Fund was meant to benefit women, people with disabilities, youths. But other than women, you're saying it benefited wealthy individuals and rich counties. So when you bring government to things that are primarily supposed to be done by private sector, you end up with these kinds of things. So there's a problem in the value of land, in the price of land. But the solution is not government to come and then determine the value. The solution is to bring the policy and regulatory intervention to moderate and to provide an enabling environment. But we certainly should leave it to market forces.
To the market forces.
I'd like to comment on the issue of, I think Edwin is quite right about the pricing. You know, why the issue of price? The land and the system that we have in Kenya, the majority of land is in private hands. It's in private hands, and also communities. So what happens is that if government had a lot of land in its hands, then it would be able to control the price, because you're able to release and determine price because you have got economies of scale and you can set the price.
Yes.
Now, because government has got not much land, it is not able to control pricing, and therefore what would happen is that, and it would be very important for housing, for affordable housing to succeed, the role of government is so critical going forward, and therefore government needs to consider to own land, so that the national government and the county government have some land banking available for this social program. This is a social program, because to have no land, you start off from a point of a challenge, to have no land. So it's important that just the way government has invested long term on infrastructure land, buying corridors for infrastructure, SGR corridors, that is a part of priorities. The same way you compensate for land because you want to do roads, you want to do rail and other things, dams, you compensate. It's the same thinking that needs to be around housing, that you are going to put enough funds around housing by land acquisition in correct locations, in thousands of acres, in preparation for mass housing. That thinking needs to expand from the public corridors of infrastructure and dams into housing. And that way, then you're able to avail land at a reasonable cost. You have a stock, you have a land for future, and this is a key investment for the government. Otherwise, going forward, if you don't have the land, and it is always in private hands, you'll be always at the mercy of the private owners.
Yes.
And you have to keep negotiating and agreeing, and land costs continue to increase over time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, can I add that it's a little interesting to notice that Telkom is offloading.
That is what I wanted to raise,
stock of
because
land.
yes,
Now, and
that is in the business
I would
daily
want to
too.
observe. I think it's useful for policy leaders, policy drivers, to appreciate the opportunity that arises when state entities like this find themselves in a situation whereby they must release some of their land.
yes,
Now,
because
in
some of
Nairobi,
this, the idle capacity of this land also
in
for the
Nairobi
longest time.
and in other places, if this has to be done, and you can tell from the thrust of our discussion, we are decrying the need to access land which is well located and also probably affordable.
Yes.
I think the government policy drivers must try to lock on to this kind of opportunities as a first priority, so that if indeed it is suitable for the housing programs that we are talking about, then they lock on to it without letting it be released into private hands, because the moment it's off into private hands, it's held speculatively, it's probably going to be inaccessible at the cost that we intend to to access it. So it's a good opportunity, and I think it's not only Telkom that will be doing this kind of a thing in the near and midterm future. So this should be.
So
a
we should be
policy.
able to secure these lands
Exactly.
that are
Exactly.
in the hands of the government, not
it's-
going into the private hands, because of course
Yeah.
the prices will skyrocket at the end of the day, and achieving now that particular Big Four agenda on housing will be a pipe dream.
The opportunity is with us.
And many
now.
parastatals, of
Yeah.
course, they have huge, expansive
Yes,
tract of
indeed.
land that can be very useful, especially when it comes to affordable housing. But I wanted also to latch on the issue of spatial planning, Edwin, and we've seen recently that yes, you talked of the SGR corridors. Houses have been demolished because we are being told this is actually the corridor of SGR. So we had a situation in Koroi where people have put up beautiful structures along the way. They hear, oh, we are actually on the SGR corridor, so we have actually to bring down your structure. The issue of compensation has been there. Well, I don't understand, if we had a good spatial planning and we have it, and we know this is where we want to build roads and all, will we actually be facing the challenges we're having right now, bringing down structures? Because people now, they have bugbears and fears of putting up beautiful structures. You don't know if you're on a road reserve. Tomorrow you'll be told, oh, we are trying to resuscitate the railway line because the meter gauge railway also is passing through your land. And maybe there was an agreement with Kenya Railways along the way, but the government will always have an upper hand. So when you're talking about spatial plan, do we consider the citizenry as well? Because I think that should be an informing document on where we're having infrastructure passing, where people will be living, and will not have these collisions with the government because of infrastructure planning as well.
Okay. Thanks, Dibal. I'll come back to it, but just a minor point of clarification. We sold, because we are talking as if Telkom is a government entity selling land. We sold Telkom a long time ago. It's already a private company owned by a foreign.
But still, the
private
government has a biggest share in Telkom right now.
It has shares,
Yes.
but the person who then says, I want to then sell this land, realize the value, is usually the private equity investor who is looking for cash. I think we should look at other state corporations, and I agree with what you're saying. Do they need the land? But we shouldn't sell it. We should then move it to a land bank that can then be useful, because this is something that should have happened a long time ago. But going back to your spatial planning, I don't think it's just an issue of SGR and spatial planning. The difference between why we are called the third world and other people are called first world has nothing to do with intelligence or DNA, just has to do with how organized people are or disorganized they are. So it is not an issue just in spatial planning, it's everywhere, whether it's roads, whether it's energy. We don't sit and look at what is the 50-year plan and how do we plan today so that infrastructure as we may need it, whether it's airports, whether it is trains, whether it's ports, that we will not interrupt people's lives unnecessarily. So it is inherently a third world problem that we are not an organized people. It's not just an SGR thing. Even in our politics, we don't sit and look at what is the constitution that can last the next 50 to 100 years. We look at the constitution that can take people to power over the next 5 to 10 years, and then when we realize there's something with it, we call a referendum, and we'll always be doing referendum. So it's not just an SGR or special planning issue. It is who we are as a people. We are not organized, and we don't have long-term vision.
Thank you. Could we also tease out maybe the issue of resource mobilization, which is very critical as well? And we can tease out the issue of existing housing finance that maybe needs to be reviewed with the aim of packaging financial products that fit the affordable credit paradigm as it is right now. Housing cooperative societies and pension schemes can also increase the contribution to property development, and I think this is where you come in, especially for the lower end market, people who are looking for 4 million, 5 million, because I think looking above from the higher tier, that is not really affordable right now, if you go by what housing finance is doing right now, because they're actually giving out, such as the lower end, mortgage services as well. But where does housing cooperative really come in right now? Because I think also you're very critical right now when people are addressing the issue of housing.
There's a very important dichotomy that we must address of demand and supply. The housing, especially housing cooperatives, and SACCOs have the demand side of the spectrum. And of course, most developers will have the supply side. We are looking at a scenario whereby we must create that synergy where the existing cooperatives will provide the end user because they have the infrastructure in terms of the systems and the people. But again, the question of time, because most SACCOs will give loans between 3 and 5 years. If we can elongate that, it means that we can attract more. And the issue of demand has never been an issue with the cooperatives. The issue has always been supply, the capacity to deliver to your members.
Yes.
And that is why I've always insisted that the government should have started with the existing players in the industry, whether they are private or cooperatives sector, and meet us where we are, from where we are. Because ask yourself, why has it taken more than 2 years to even implement the first housing program in the country? It's because it has been a lot of discussion without a lot of action. And what we needed to do is to understand the players, what they are doing and what they are going through. In some scenarios, we don't need all that support, but we need the government to understand with the specific interventions that each player would need. And for example, there is no program that can succeed without piloting it. We've not piloted the housing scheme so that we can see these houses that we are talking about, what are the dynamics. For example, we take care of social aspects of this scheme. If you do a 2-bedroom house to a family, will people fit in the 2-bedroom, and the fact that 2-3 years from now, your demands of a house will have changed, because a startup or a young family today might fit in a single room. What will happen if we give them mortgage and in 3-4 years their lifestyles and taste changes? There must be that transition from 2 to 3 to 4, and maybe to private ownership of houses in a standalone setup. So that is one area that I think the cooperatives can play very well. And especially for me, I'm very passionate about rural housing, for the simple reason, the estimation of the population of Kenya today will be around 52 million. And out of 52 million, that 6 million are in the rural setup. That is 70% of people are in the rural setup. So even as we talk of affordable housing, we are only concentrating on the urban centers. But when we go to the rural areas, we also find that people are living in very deplorable conditions. And they too need to have decent housing. Maybe not as expensive, but they have land, and they may not require a lot of these other plannings. So cooperatives can meet them where they are because of the geographical spread. So I'm looking at that as I'm very passionate about it, because 9 million rural homes. Actually, we have about 9 million rural homes, because the average size of a family is 3.9 in Kenya, about 4 persons. So that tells you that there is a very huge demand, even in the rural setup, that the cooperatives can put up. And for me, I've done a paper, I have a proposal to the government to team up with the cooperatives and SACCOs to do houses in the rural areas. And that will ensure that we do not only concentrate on people working in towns, but our parents, our relatives in the rural areas will have decent homes. And when we retire, we can also have a comfortable dwelling place. And rural setup does not require a lot of things. In fact, you just need to provide a simple house using simple technology, provide things like solar power and water, clean water, and you are done. That will solve the issue of sanitation, will solve the issue of diseases, will shape up so many other things that people need to do. So it's my honest belief that even as we look at this, the cooperatives, especially because in our country we have about 22,000 cooperatives with a population of a membership of 14 million. 40 million is a very big constituency that the government cannot ignore. So how can we provide that platform for them, because most of them have land, but they lack money to enhance that. And the best point for cooperatives is that they have the market and the demand side. So what we need to do is to create the question that you asked. If we have a shortfall of 2 trillion,
Yes.
we can create a revolving funds that will be administered through the cooperatives and other private sectors, that you can borrow money and you don't need 5 trillion. With 1 trillion, you can revolve it like you do with higher education, Osborne, Weasel Fund, and other funds, and it is administered for that, so that as people pay up, it is availed to the next people. So those are some of the suggestions that we'd want to table and would seriously want to consider in this provision of affordable houses.
Right. Let's come back as I also prepare our headline thoughts, because Edwin talked about other developed countries, and us, we're not really borrowing a lift, but Singapore has been also very pivotal when it comes to affordable housing as well, and Kenya can learn one or two things from them, which they have successfully provided affordable housing for citizens through an integrated housing approach that ensured proper and well-coordinated process through the Housing Development Board, which also provided estate management services. I wanted us also to focus on the issue of maybe when it comes to funding, aside from just cooperatives, how can we tap through the pension schemes? Instead of me waiting until I'm 65 for you to give me this money so that I can actually go and prepare my burial sites and and a plan for my funeral as well. Why can't it be useful that I can actually tap into it right now as a source of financing for my housing? I think maybe there's something up the collective sleeve as far as that is concerned. You are the developers. You can actually tell us, how can we sort of come up with financial instruments, money which is probably lying idle, I should say, like the pension scheme, and tap into that to finance mortgaging, which as it is right now, it stands at 1 to 6. And I think this is a huge disparity which is indicating an overly priced and an affordable housing system here in the country. Yeah, any of you, Edwin?
Yeah, to be able to tap into my pension scheme for housing, the first thing is that I need to have the pension scheme. So that's the number one challenge that's there. I think it's only 12% of the working population are in any sort of pension scheme to
12%.
begin with. Yeah, only 12% of people who should have. We are not talking about people without jobs. We are talking about people with jobs or some sort of income. Only 12% have a pension scheme. So there's already a problem in terms of having a pension scheme. But even for those that have, we already have regulations. I don't know what percent, but there's a certain amount, I believe 60% of your pension, you can pledge it towards housing. But the issue is you still run back to the same issues. Yes, I have my pension. Let's say I've accumulated 1 million shillings of pensions for the time I've been working. I'm 30-something year old. Now, even if I pledge 60% of it, that's only 600,000. So I need to find a house that is affordable. So the issue I still think is not being able to use the pension scheme. One is having a pension, and secondly, if you have it, getting an affordable house. The place where I think we can do better is members of pension schemes should look at how much is my pension scheme allocating towards real estate development, because if you look at some of the returns you are getting from pensions, 10% kind of returns, less than 10%. If a government bond is going to give you 12.5, a 10-year government bond, then why do you need a pension manager to give you a 10% return? So members of pension schemes need to be more enlightened and more discerning to sit down and ask, where is my money being deployed? And if the issue at affordability level is supply, not demand, why can't you be allocating some of this money into affordable housing? Even if you get for me a 15% return, it is better than the 7, 8, 9% that pension schemes are allocating right now. So yes, pensions can actually work, but we need more people subscribing to pension schemes, and we need people who already subscribed in pension schemes demanding from their pension trustees or their pension fund manager better returns and allocation to affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. All right, the issue of integrated land approach, which is not there, as also we are winding up. Maybe you can weigh in, Modane, very briefly.
Sorry,
The integrated.
My mind was actually a little off what you just asked, and I was just asking myself, and probably I throw this to this gentleman as we close out. I know we also have lately come up with the unclaimed assets
Yes,
fund.
yes, yes.
And that asset seems to be growing extremely fast. That fund seems to be growing extremely fast. So I don't know whether it's one of the possible sources of financing which probably can allow funds to be borrowed at a much lower rate than is ordinary. Because I think the uptake from that fund, if we watch it, is probably going to be very low because it requires you to find out who it belonged to. It takes quite a while. So I think it's one of the opportunities also that
Well, I think the
country is
protection
facing.
around also the unclaimed asset is very pivotal because I think, yes, that will have been one of the source of funds. But the trustees, as it is right now with the mechanism around it, it's not easily accessible. It's not easily accessible, and I don't know the mechanics. Maybe that will be a bigger topic that we can actually weigh in to see if they can tap through the unclaimed asset. But of course, if we just leave it that way, that will be another, projection of clammy fingers from, people from government. Because here we have Maringa actually, and he says, I need to ask you this as we're winding up briefly. Any of you can ask. He is asking, I would like your panel to be uber honest. What has the war on corruption, how has the war on corruption affected real estate, given a third of our budget is misappropriated and a huge chunk of it is dumped kwa mjengo? Curious to see who will answer this. And maybe this is because also of the demonetization that is ongoing. I hear also a lot of money is being dumped in the real estate as well. So there's a flash of money coming, people buying property, construction materials, building, so that they can actually, ward off the money. Briefly as we're winding up. Okay. Maringa,
I don't want
is
to be the first one to go, but I would say I wish that money would come my direction. A point like this.
Same here.
I was expecting money to flood in the real estate, but I don't know where they are taking it. But having said that, I wanted to allude to the fact that Boma Yangu subscription has hit about 250,000 subscribers.
Thank you.
But only 15,000 have committed with something. And that means we've collected less than, or they have collected less than 10 million.
Thank you.
So that tells you that subscription does not mean demand.
Thank you.
So the government must interrogate what are these issues that are making people who are desirous of having the 250,000 not afford.
Thank
so
you.
that is where the story should begin.
Thank you. Right.